Here's a definition for resiliency. Resiliency is the capacity to adapt, to recover, and grow stronger when faced with challenges, stress, or adversity. That sounds like something every real estate agent's going to need to be successful. I'm Chris Mueller, ADHD high achiever, father of 6, and for over 20 years, I've led organizations, built teams, and now coach top producing real estate agents. As a director for one of the top 500 real estate companies in the US, I've seen what works, and I have seen what burns agents out. This show is where we cut through the noise and we help you build a scalable business that creates freedom, impact, and a life you love. Welcome to the Prosperity Collabs. Let's dive in. So, hey, I want to welcome you to what is episode 1 of a 4-part series. And this is something I call Unbreakable mindset. Because the reality is, in this industry, having the right mindset is hugely important. Now, when I say mindset, immediately, there's a portion of the audience that just thought, come on, Chris, this is all soft and it's fuzzy. And, think positive and positive things happen. And it sounds all kind of wishy-washy. And here's where I want you to change that mindset. Your brain is incredibly malleable. You can change the structure of your brain. And when you change the structure of your brain, you change the way that you react and the way that you perceive reality. And so we're going to be focusing on some tools and some tips to do that. Before we get into it, I want to talk about resiliency, right? Because this idea of resiliency is incredibly important. And just for the sake of today's episode, here's a definition for resiliency. Resiliency is the capacity to adapt, to recover, and grow stronger when faced with challenges, stress, or adversity. That sounds like something every real estate agent's going to need to be successful, right? Now, most people think you're born with these kind of skills. But the truth is, having resiliency, not having resiliency, the way we show up against adversity, all of these things more or less are habits that we've adopted over the course of our life. And so what we're going to get into today is how we can systemize forming resiliency. Before we get into that, though, we have to understand a little bit about the way your brain works. And so what I want to talk about is this concept of neuroplasticity and resilience. Now, I mentioned this as we were getting in, that you can form new neural pathways. The way I want you to think of this is your habits, your perceptions, the way that you view the world, the way that you react to adversity, the way that you react to pleasure, all of these things, at some point in your life, they became habitualized systems that we just fall into, because the brain is the largest user of energy in your entire body. And so as a human being, evolutionarily, we want to conserve energy because energy is expensive. You have to go and you have to hunt, or you have to go and you have to harvest. Energy is not free. It takes work. And if you're a creature that grew up in the reality of feast and famine, which is sort of the reality of the natural world, then you're going to develop systems within your body to conserve energy, particularly neurological systems. These are habits, right? And so you, when you were young, typically around 3 years old, you began creating a framework for interpreting and reacting to reality. Now, I see this with my son right now. He's 7 years old, and he's kind of watching the world, and he's kind of seeing how things work, and every now and then he'll make pronouncements. What's fascinating about that is they're not always right. In fact, a lot of times they're just tragically wrong. He'll say, well, these kind of people are, faster because their legs are shorter and they're closer to the ground, right? And you're like, no, that's not at all correct. But his interpretation is he's seeing kids who maybe aren't growing as fast as him, so they have a little bit more coordination. So that coordination allows him a little bit more speed on the playground, and so he's writing a rule in his life that short people are faster, right? It's not true, but that's his experience. And your experience has led you to create rules, neural pathways by which you're interpreting life too. And it has a huge impact on how we show up against adversity. And so as we get into this concept of neural plasticity and resilience, what I really want you to think about and just continue kind of self-monitoring is, what are the things that you do without thinking about them? What are the reactions you have without really understanding them? Because in order to form new neural pathways, we have to get out of the habit of reacting and start getting into a habit of acting and forming, because every time we step out of the pattern of reaction and we step into the pattern of action, a specific intentional choice, then what we are doing is we are forming a new habit, a new neural pathway. It takes a lot of energy. And eventually what happens is that new choice, that becomes the habit. That becomes the reaction. And that's what we want to get to. We want to get to the point where resilience is our reaction, instead of whatever we learned growing up from whatever happened in our lives, right? So how do we form new neural pathways? I've alluded to it as we've been talking. It's going to be new. It's going to be deliberate action, right? It's deliberately doing something with repetition and intention so that the connections between neurons gets formed. And so for me, an example is I used to just stop at the candy dish on my assistant's desk every time I passed it, man. I would hit one of those candies and it would be boom. And you know what? It's not a big thing, but I felt like inflammation in my body. I started putting on a little extra weight because I was eating probably 20, 30 pieces of candy every single day. And those little fun size, they get more fun every single one, right? And so I wanted to break the habit, but it was very intentional. And so what I had to do was I created sort of a silly mantra where I would walk by the candy and I would say things like, "I rebuke you." It's kind of silly. Or I would say, "It's poison." And I just kept repeating that. And it was very hard. Now I don't go hit the candy dish, right? Now when I hit the candy dish, it's intentional. But the ingrained activity is to not hit the candy dish, right? And so it is a deliberate practice of repetition. I'm going and I'm doing that over and over and over deliberately. So in your business, right now, there's a need to lead generate. And lead generation puts us in a position where we can be rejected. And rejection is one of the things that we have learned to insulate ourselves against our entire lives. Because rejection on a very primal level is very dangerous. If you are in a close-knit community that you depend on for survival and you're encountering rejection on a regular basis, that means that your livelihood and your security are at stake. And if we look at Maslow's pyramid of ascending needs, the most primary need of any human being is security, right? And so, as a real estate agent, we're asking you to put yourself in a position where you have systemized being rejected on a regular basis so that you can find the leads that you need, so that you can get the contracts that you need, so you can get the closings that you need. But it goes against every ingrained neurological pathway that we've formed throughout our life, right? Okay, we understand that now. Now we have to have that deliberate practice and repetition to rewire our brains so that we form a new association. So here's the good news. The brain can rewire itself to improve resilience. But the process, like I said, requires focused effort and energy and consistent practice. New pathways form most effectively when challenges are embraced and met with intentional strategies. What does that mean? Well, if you've ever worked out, then you have probably encountered this concept of progressive overload. And the way I like to think of this is nothing grows in comfort. You don't form new neural pathways in comfort. You don't form muscle in comfort. You don't form new skills in comfort. It's only when you have pushed past the place of comfort that the body says, oh, we need to adapt now, right? I've got to do something different. And so, again, back to the lead generation. Say you're just calling in your sphere, and that's uncomfortable. Anxiety rises within your chest. And you just commit to it, right? There's a couple things that are happening right there. As you are pushing through and you are calling and you are sticking with it in that uncomfortableness, what's happening is your body is going to try to find ways to insulate you or to repress that feeling. And so new neural pathways, new associations begin to form, and that's resilience forming within you. You are forming a habit of resilience, of standing up to the potential of rejection. The other piece of that is addressing the story that you're telling yourself too. We're going to get into this in later episodes, but I want to touch on it right now. As you're doing that lead generation, what is the internal monologue that's happening? That is a habit. So when you pick up the phone and you're getting ready to call someone and your mind says, oh, I don't want to bug them, that's a habit. Why do you assume that you're going to bug them? Are you the kind of person that is just super annoying? Because most often you're not, right? And if you are, we can work on that too. But more often than not, particularly if you're calling in your sphere, your past clients, and you're calling to check in and you're bringing value and you're bringing insight, they're not annoyed to hear from you. Why would you write that negative story about yourself, right? And so just addressing the inner monologue, again, is part of that process of forming the new neural pathway. Again, I want to reference some of these insights I mentioned. So it's deliberate practice and repetition. It's breaking out of the comfort zone. It's focused attention, right? And one of the things we haven't mentioned yet is physical exercise. There's just this incredible link between moving your body physically and your brain becoming more plastic. And this, I don't know why. I'm not a neuroscientist. I've just read it and I've listened to it and I've been implementing it in my life and the lives of my clients. But if you, before you go to a new habit forming session, right? Go walk the stairs in your building for 10 minutes. Go jump in front of your desk for 5 minutes. Do sets of 5 minute or sets of 1 minute hops for 5 sessions. And then once you caught your breath, make the calls. Because your body now is associating, for some reason, that activity with the physical activity, and it's making it more susceptible, right? It's kind of a cool hack. It's built into you. And again, if I go back to where does this come from? Well, typically action in an evolutionary sense. And again, I don't want you to think of this as like evolution and God creating the universe and all those things. Personally, I believe that God created the universe, right? I also believe he created us to exist within this world. And because he created us to exist in this world, there's certain things that we did early on that we haven't necessarily been able to leave, or they're still built into the system. But going back to this, I'm just going to use the term evolutionary, so bear with me. If it makes sense that most of our action, our physical exertion, was tied to survival, right? And so if you are tying this habit-forming session to physical action, your body goes, oh, this is a survival thing. We need to form these new neural pathways quickly because we don't want to get eaten by the tiger, right? There's no tiger, but the same mechanisms are still working. So use them, right? Don't leave them back in 1,000, 2,000 years ago. Use them, right? Use them to your advantage. So then what we've also learned in forming new habits, particularly, again, any neurological habit that we're trying to form, any new neural pathway, is that sleep and recovery are huge. And this is incredible, incredible science. And if you have never read or listened to Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, I highly recommend it. But what we've learned about the brain is sleep is critical to the forming of new skills. Because what happens is during the day, you're going through your day and you're doing things, you're acquiring skills, you're acquiring knowledge, and most of that is going into a short-term memory repository. It's your operating memory. Now, I'm a person with attention deficit disorder. I mentioned that in the intro. And what I've come to know about my brain is I have less operating memory than most people. My wife, for instance, has an excessive amount of operating memory, right? And so we can have conversations and she will retain everything, whereas I have a very limited cache of information to retain. So I've used tools like my AI scribe to keep track of conversations for me because I'm compensating that. Here's a way you can free up more operating memory, whether you are an attention deficit person or you're a more standard operating procedure, whatever it is, sleep. Because what we've learned is that your operating memory is limited, it is not infinite, and it gets full. And the only way to clean out the cache is to get good, deep, nutritive sleep. They call it deep wave sleep. And what they've seen is that deep wave, that kind of whoa, whoa, whoa. Something about that happening in the brain is memory is being transferred from the short-term cache to the long-term cache. You're literally clearing out and you're sifting through what do we need to keep forever and what do we need to discard of, and that's happening during your sleep. And if you wake up the next day and you've gotten good nutritive sleep, then that operating memory space is now open again to receive new memory. But if you're never getting the nutritive sleep, your ability to retain that information becomes significantly diminished. Now, the reality is, most of us don't sleep that well for a number of reasons, right? And so I'm trying to form this habit of resiliency. I'm putting myself in situations where I'm uncomfortable. I'm pushing through that. I'm creating a new narrative to go along with it. I'm doing physical exercise. I'm focusing my attention, but I'm not sleeping. Then I may find myself running into a wall in the habit forming that I need to form this resiliency. And so we have to make sure that we're doing it. Now, I want to touch on something I said earlier in the beginning. Your brain is wired to save energy. It forming a new neural pathway takes a significant amount of energy and effort. Your brain is the largest user of energy in your entire body. And so when we look at forming habits, you've got to understand that the brain doesn't want to. It likes the way things are. And so, you're going to have to overcome that. And you're going to have to give yourself some grace. If I do 2 hours of lead generation or an hour of lead generation where I put myself in an uncomfortable situation and I put myself in the situation to form new neural pathways for a consistent amount of time, and I'm doing all of those things, I'm going to be mentally fatigued at the end of it. And so I'm just going to say, if you're not feeding the machine right, you're not hydrating, you're not eating good protein-rich meals, you're not getting enough fats, guys, because your brain is the majority fat. And so getting your good omega-3s, getting a good balanced diet of fats, then it's going to be harder, right? Because your body wants to do this. Now, I want you just to constantly remind yourself, your brain isn't a muscle, but it works like one. The more you use it in challenging ways, the stronger it gets. Your brain is not a muscle, but it works like one. And the more you use it in challenging ways, the stronger it gets. Now, what's the other side of that? Muscles atrophy. And so if you're not using your brain, if you're not forming the new neural pathways, if you're not pushing yourself, then you are likely just to fall into the old patterns, and it gets harder to form new ones. The more plastic you keep your brain, the more plastic it will remain. The more sedentary it becomes, it's sort of like your cardiovascular health, the longer it takes to get back into cardiovascular health. But it doesn't matter if you haven't learned a new trick in 20 years, you still have these systems built into you. So this is kind of where I'm going to land the plane today for neuroplasticity and forming resilience. We're going to get into a growth mindset tomorrow because this is key to it. Or pardon me, not tomorrow. We're going to get into a growth mindset in our next episode next week. But this week, I really want you to be intentional. What are the things that I can systemize? I can say, I'm going to do 10 calls, 10 conversations. I'm going to do 10 reps every single day because remember, the brain isn't a muscle, but acts like one. I'm going to get into a habit of every day at 10 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning, I'm going to make 10 calls. I'm going to do something to make that the reaction. I'm going to take the action to deliberately form a new reaction in my body, which is I get to my desk, I do those calls, I create those connections, right? I'm going to implement some of these hacks. And if you want some, you can download the PDF on prosperitycollabs.com, and you can start implementing some of these things as we go through the process. But don't just listen. Put it to work, change your life, and we'll catch you next time. Hey, thanks for spending some time with me today. If you're ready to stop feeling stretched thin and start building a real estate business that works for you, not the other way around, I offer one-on-one strategy calls where we look at your current business, we look at what's holding you back, and we create a plan and a clear path forward. It's no fluff, just practical steps you can put into action right away. So head to prosperitycollabs.com/call. That's Prosperity Collabs with 2 L's /call. And let's set up your one-on-one coaching call today. Hey, until next time, keep growing and keep building the life that you were made for.